Hello folks, today I'm gonna teach you how to test React Native applications using React Native testing library and integration tests. But first of all, why use integration tests? Well, basically because in my opinion, integration tests have the best cost benefit between amount of written code and reliability gained from that code. Because if you don't know exactly what integration test is, I'm going to give you a quick overview about unit tests and integration tests, which are the two most common ways to test your frontend. Basically, when we talk about integration tests, we just care if our system works well together. And when we talk about unit tests, what you care about is you want to break all of your software down to the smallest testable pieces of code possible, and then you want to test them in isolation. What means that, for instance, if I were to test a clap, if I were making an integration test, I would say, okay, did my hands touch and make any kind of sound? If yes, my test passes. If not, my test fails. But if we were testing a clap using unit tests, what I would probably test is my right arm movement and my left arm movement. And then I would write something like, I want my right arm moved to the center of my body and stop approximately in front of my nose. And I would say the same thing about my left arm. And then I would test my right arm and my left arm in isolation. But if I were to run them together, those two tests passing doesn't necessarily mean that my code works, because my arms can make the right movement, but they don't touch each other and make the sound I want my code to do, in this case my example, whatever. And that's why, in my opinion, integration tests are much simpler and much easier to write if you're starting to test applications right now. Obviously, in a real-world environment, you're gonna want to have all sorts of tests, not only unit, not only integration, and not only end-to-end tests, which is a subject for another video if you folks want me to talk about it also. But enough with the chit chat. I've written a little application that we're gonna test together, and hopefully it will help you to get a good grasp of how integration tests work and how they should be written using React Native testing library. So let's go to the code. Hello folks, I'm just passing here to clarify one quick thing. During various points of the video you are going to watch, I use specific methods from libraries such as Jest and React Native testing library that I'm going to teach you, but I never really explained where did I learn them from. So I just wanted to make sure that I told you to read the documentation. It's really important. So if you see Jest's documentation, you're gonna see that it has a bunch of detailed guides. It has its API reference, it has framework guides, it has a bunch of stuff. And the same thing goes for React Native testing library. It has guides, here. It has APIs, it has external sources and stuff like that. And it's super important for you to read the documentation, especially when you feel overwhelmed or doesn't know what to do or how to test your application. Because even though I tried my best to show you the most used utility methods and functions from those libraries, there are way more methods than it's possible for someone to cover in just one video in those libraries. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to reinforce the message. Please read the doc. It's gonna make you an awesome developer. And I'm gonna leave you to my video. I hope you enjoy it. Bye! So this is the application that I've built for us to test together, and as you can see, it's a really simple application. It's just a to-do list app. So basically we have this text input right here where we can type stuff, so for instance test, and we can click this giant plus button here on the screen, and this is going to create an item for us. And we can also delete items, and we have some kinds of validation. So for instance, if I try to create an item without typing anything into the text input, I'm gonna see this error right here. As you can see, this is a super simple application. I really avoided doing anything super fancy here because I wanted the whole focus of this video going to the testing of the application. So the first thing that we got to do in order to be able to test it is we have to install React Native testing library. You can know how to do this by typing React Native testing library in Google, and it's either going to take you to their GitHub page or directly to their website. But basically all that you got to do is you got to choose if you're rather using yarn or npm, and then copy and paste this command right into your terminal. I have already done this, so if we go into my package.json, I already have the testing library dependency here in dev dependencies, because anything that's related to tests is not going to production. It's just here to help us develop our application. And that's all we have to install in order to make sure that our application is gonna work, that our tests are gonna work. When you create an app using React Native init, just as I did, it already handles setting Jest up for you. Jest is a test runner. Basically, Jest is gonna be responsible for finding and running every test that you write, but it's already configured by default, so we do not have to do anything. The only thing that we have to do to start our tests is create a new file, and every test file that you write has to be one specific keyword that's gonna help Jest know that it is a test file. So what I like to do is I copy the name of the component that I'm testing. In our case, this is app. And then I add dot, and instead of adding JS directly to tell my computer that this is a JavaScript file, what you have to do is you can either choose to add like test to the middle of it, or you can also call your test files spec files. They're both the same thing. Actually, this isn't going to change anything in your tests. It's just a matter of preference. I usually use spec, but it doesn't make any difference at all. But once I run my tests, Jest is already going to recognize that this app.spec.js file is a test file. So if I run this command right here, it's going to give me a failed test suite, basically because every test suite must contain at least one test, and app.spec.js is an empty file, so that's why it failed. Okay, but before we start testing, let's think, what do we want to test? What's important to be tested? Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, tests, special integration tests, only care about reliability. The only reason they're there is to make your life easier. It's to make you sure that you can trust your tests. So basically, what you have to do is think of the expected behavior of your application, and then tell your code somehow to expect the behavior that you want your application to have. Now we have to think, what do we want to test in our application? Well, basically, this is a to-do list, so I expect to be able to create items. So in this case, let me just do this test and create an item. So that's one expected behavior. Let's write it down. Create an item. I should be able to delete one item. So just click the delete button and it should disappear. Delete an item. I should be able to create more than one item. So I don't know, maybe your app has some kind of specific bug that makes that allows you to create one item but not many. So I just have to create more. I'm just gonna write this down, more than one And okay, I just make sure that I can create more than one item. So create multiple items. And I also want to validate that when I'm creating an item, I have valid data in the text input. So whenever I have like I try to so whenever I try to create an item with an empty text, an error should pop up on my screen. So should show an error, error, whenever I try to create an invalid to do. And I also expect this error to disappear at some point. In our case, it disappears once I create a valid text. So error warning should disappear once a valid item is created. And basically, these 5 items are what we are expecting our tests to validate. And that's it. But how do we do that actually? Well, when we talk about React Native testing library, it has a very awesome way of testing stuff, which is it expects you to behave as a user of your application. What means that instead of, I don't know, having to know your code to know what you're doing, you're basically just gonna to inspect stuff that is on the screen, stuff that is able to the user to see. So for instance, if I want to select this create item button, what I have to do is search for a giant plus button on my screen, and that's it. And that's how you're gonna query all of your stuff inside React Native testing library. Again, maybe that's not as clear as it should be for you, but I'm gonna start writing some examples down, and as I go along, things are gonna become clearer for us. So whenever we are going to test something, we need to import a few things before. Well, the first thing that we got to import is the component that we are going to be testing. So in my case, I'm going to import app. And the second thing that we have to import are testing libraries methods that you need to render your components and fire actions in it. So I'm just going to import them, and I'm going to explain their utility as we test stuff from add testing library React Native. The first method that I'm going to import is render. Render is basically going to make us able to interact with our application. And that's it. That's all the imports we need for this moment. Maybe you're not familiar with Jest, but Jest has some globally available functions that allows us to write down our tests. And one of them is called it. Oh, sorry, it. My VS Code just imported something here. And it accepts 2 parameters. The first one of them is a quick description of what are we going to be testing. So let's test this constraint that we have already set up. So create an item. And maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but it's a good practice that your tests make sense when read like plain English. So usually whenever you use it to test something, most people start their test with should. So it makes sense as an English sentence. So it should create an item. It's pretty self-descriptive. If you've never seen this test before, you're probably gonna know what this test wants to achieve, and that's it. And the second parameter that it accepts is an arrow function in which your test is gonna be run. Before we start testing, I just want to say that it has an alias, so it's another name it can be called by, which is test. They're both the same thing. They're just like spec and test. Choose whatever you like the most. I rather use it, so I'm gonna stick with it. I don't know why I did that, but okay. But well, how do we start our tests? Well, the first thing that we gotta do is we gotta render a component so it's working and we're able to interact with it. So let's do this. So I'm gonna write const rendered component, and I'm going to render it. I'm gonna render app in good old plain JSX. Oh, I just remembered something. Actually, I have to import one more thing, which is React, because in the version of React that I'm using, you have to import React into your document every time you're using JSX. If I'm not mistaken, newer versions of React doesn't ask you to do this, but in our version it does. So I'm just gonna keep it here. And basically what this render function is gonna return us is a bunch of utility methods that are gonna allow us to scan our component and interact with it and make assertions based on it. Maybe you're not so used to the concept of assertions, but basically tests are all about expecting some behavior to happen when you make testing library actions. Is gonna give you the means to do those certain actions, but assertions are the way you are gonna tell your program to expect some things to happen. So before I start this test, let me just do a simple example for you if you never seen test being done before. So I can create a variable called const test and assign the value of q plus q to it, and that's something being done on my program. So that's half of our test. What's left to be done is I have to tell my program to expect something to happen based on what I've just done. So again, this is a globally available function by Jest, but we have this function called expect. Basically it expects to receive a value. In our case, it's going to be the test variable, and you can say what you want it to be. So in our case, I expect this to be equal to 4 because q plus q is 4, or to be equal to q plus q, whatever it doesn't mean. It doesn't matter. Sorry. So I expect test to equal q, and then I can run my test and see. And see what has gone wrong, because apparently, oh yeah, I said that it was going to be equal to 2. It has to be equal to 4. So now if I test it, everything should be alright. So yeah, our test passes because I've done some action and I've expected a result from it. And if by any reason the action that we generated doesn't has the expected output, our test is gonna fail. So for instance, if I type 3 here, our test is not gonna pass. I have an extension to VS Code that already runs my tests for me, so you can see that it has already failed here. But on the terminal, it also has failed because it has the wrong value. So that's basically how our tests are gonna work. But okay, we generated like a super simple action, which is assigning a value to a variable. But how do we apply that same kind of logic to our component? The render function returns us a lot of utility methods that we can use to scan down our component and interact with it. So for instance, if I, instead of like assigning this value to a named variable, I just destructured it, I can press Ctrl plus spacebar and I would see a lot of available methods that render returns us. They're all very interesting, but the one we are looking for right now, it's one called getByText, and its name, it's pretty explanative. It's gonna search something on the screen based on the text it passes as a parameter to this function. And if this item that we are looking for exists, it's going to return us its value. And if it doesn't exist, it's gonna throw us an error. So in our case, what we wanna do is we wanna search for this huge plus button here in our code base. So let's do this. Let's do const. Okay, my tabs are, okay, just let me adjust my spaces. And that's it, const add item button, and I want to query my document by text, so I'm just going to use the get by text method, and I'm going to search for plus. And what we have done so far is we rendered our component, and we have searched for this button right here, and it is stored in this variable. But that's not enough. In order for us to create an item, we have to do a series of steps. The first one of them is find the plus button. The second one of them is finding this text input right here. We have to type stuff into this text input. We have to press the add item button, and we have to verify if the item that we are trying to create has been created. So the first step of this is done. We have just found the add item button. But how do we find our text input? Because even though I have this placeholder text right here, we do not have any text on it. So we cannot use get by text, because write something is not really a text in our screen. So the solution for us is to use another method that is returned by render, which is get by placeholder text. So get by placeholder text, and we are going to assign our text input value to a variable called text input. And we are going to use this get by placeholder text function, and we're gonna pass the text that we are looking for as a parameter. So in our case, it's gonna be write something. All right, so we have done two things so far. We have done three things actually. We rendered our component, we found our add item button, and we have found our text input button. Our fourth step is to type something into our text input. But how do we do that? We do not have the means to do that just yet. Well, thankfully for us, testing library has a set of utility methods that are available inside a utility method called fire event. So whenever we want to interact with anything on our screen, we are going to use fire event. So as I just told you, what we want to do right now is type some text into our text input. So we are going to call one of fire events submethods, which is change text. And change text accepts two parameters. The first one of them is the variable that is going to suffer that mutation. So in our case, it's text input, which means that we are going to interact with it. And the second parameter that change text requires is the text that we are going to pass to our component. So in our case, I'm just gonna type first to do. And after that, the next step that we have to follow is we have to press the add item button. So again, as you might already imagine, we have to use fire event. But we cannot use change text. We have to use another submethod called press, which is very simple. It just requires the item that is going to be pressed. So in our case, I'm going to just type fire event.press and pass add item button as a parameter. So far what we have done is we have rendered our component, we have found add item button, we have found text input, we have typed something into our text input, and we have pressed our add item button. So far our item should have already been created, and all that's left for us to do is to make an assertion and make sure that whatever we just created really exists in our code. But how do we do that? Well, basically, I misspelled first here, didn't I? I'm not sure. How do I write first? Sorry, let me just check this on Google. No, yeah, I just written it in the right way. So basically, what you have just done is this: first to do and created plus. And what we have to do in order to make sure that this exists is we gotta search for this text first to do, because we have to make sure that we created the item that has this specific text that we that we've passed to our text input. So first of all, let me just change this value for a variable. So const created item text, because I'm gonna use it more than once and I do not want to rewrite it. And what I want to do is I'm going to create a variable called created item, and I'm going to get by text, and I'm going to search for this text. Okay, we have already found this, but how do we make sure that this really exists? Well, basically, we can rely on Jest's globally available expect method. So we can use expect. I don't know why my VS Code keeps auto-completing to this weird stuff. And we can pass created item as a value to be evaluated. And we can use a submethod of expect, which is not dot to be new. So basically what we're doing here is we're expecting created item. We're having a negation operator here, and we're saying to be new. So it just has to exist. And if I run this test, everything should run just fine, and my test suite should pass. But there's kind of this golden rule when you're testing something, just so we can make sure that we are not having any kind of false positive. You should never trust a test that you haven't seen fail. So let's just make this test fail on purpose, just to make sure that we are not getting some kind of false positive here. So I'm gonna get by text, and instead of passing the created item text variable, I'm gonna pass this string. Therefore, this text is going to be different from this text, and my test should fail. So let's just see how that goes. And yes, my test has already failed. And as you can see, this text doesn't exist. So let's just return it to its normal state. And congratulations, we have now just written our first test for a React Native component together. And that's pretty awesome. So we can remove this test from our list. Well, the second test that I want to do is I wanted to make sure that I can create more than one item. So basically, it's the same test that we have just done, but instead of using just one, instead of creating just one item, we are gonna to create a bunch of them. I'm just gonna create 2 because that's enough for my test to pass, and that's it. But basically, I'm going to use the same structure as the first test. I'm just gonna duplicate this. So I'm gonna create created item text underline 2, and this is gonna be second to do. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to replicate this and pass created item text 2 instead of the first one. And I'm going to rename this to first created item, and I'm going to create the second created item. And let me just, okay, yes, let me just pass this down. And I also have to duplicate this and make sure that this test passes. And if I have done everything right, my test should pass. Yeah, my test still passes. I don't know why, but my VS Code extension is not working properly, but that's okay. When we run yarn test on our terminal, everything works just fine, so that's what matters to us. Again, just following that golden rule, I'm just going to change my text and see my tests fail. So just to make sure that I'm not getting any false positives here. So yeah, it just works. And now I can delete this. And talking about delete, now what we have to do is we want to make sure that we can delete an item. So basically what we have to do in this test, oh, I actually forgot to do one thing. I forgot to change this test right here. I forgot to change this text's description. So let me just do, it should create multiple items. And that's it. That's just a minor detail that's gonna help us whenever a test fails. Because when your test fails, as you can see here, the description that you gave to your test just is shown in the terminal. So in case you have, I don't know, thousands of tests, it's just easier for you to search for this in your code base. So you should create an item and get to the right file. That has your test directly. Now what we have to test is our application should delete an item. And basically all that we got to do differently than the first tests is by the end of the creation of the item, we just have to find this X button and click on it, and we should make sure that our item has disappeared. So first of all, we have to create our item all over again. And why is that? It's because all of our tests are being run in different environments. Actually, it's a new render, so it's a new render of our application, so everything is gonna be new. All the variables are gonna be resetted and that kind of stuff. So here I just copied the creation of an item, but I'm gonna delete all of the assertions that I have made. So because I do not need them, since I have already validated the creation of an item. I don't need that assertion anymore, because if, for instance, something happened in our application and we weren't able to create items anymore, I would have like multiple errors pointing to the same thing, and that wouldn't be good. That would just create a lot of noise, which would not be helpful in the time that we were to solve those problems. But that's it. So what I have to do here is I have to like create my item, blah blah blah, and instead of searching for like the created item text, what I have to do here is I'm gonna create a new variable called delete item button, and let me just erase this letter here. And what I'm gonna search for is for an uppercase X, because that's what I used here. And this button should already exist. So basically, in order to delete an item, I have to interact with this button. So I have to click on the delete item button. So I'm gonna use fire event.press again, and I'm gonna press the delete item button. So now if our application is working correctly, our input or to-do item should have just disappeared. So basically what we have to do now is we have to search for the text of the created item and make sure that it returns a null value to us. But we cannot use get by text, because as I mentioned earlier, whenever get by text doesn't find for the value it's searching for, it's just gonna throw us an error. So if I do this, get by text, and pass created item text as a parameter and run my tests, it's going to return us an error, and you're gonna see what it tells us. Just wait a minute. And no instances found with text first to do, and it's going to return us an error. So when we are querying for texts that we aren't sure that exists in our document, what we want to use is actually another method called query by text. The way it works, it's pretty similar to get by text, but basically it doesn't return us an error whenever our text doesn't exist. So here, if I replace my get by text with query by text, the error should disappear, as you just saw in my VS Code extension that always spoils my test for us. But basically we haven't done any assertion here, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call this deleted um, deleted item, and I want to expect this to be new. We're just going to use the same to be new built-in method of expect, but instead of using the negation, we're just going to use it in the raw way because we did not want to negate it this time. So expect deleted item slash to be new, and my test should work just fine. Again, following my golden rule of never trust a test you haven't seen fail, I'm just gonna add a negation to it and see how it behaves. So yarn test. Yeah, my test fails, so we can just return it to the way it was. So we have just finished another item of our list. So now all that is left for us to test, we now have tests is the
for the creation of an
item,
is it shown when multiple items,
it's supposed to be shown,
for the
and stuff
deletion
like
of
that.
an item.
So basically the way that we make the error component be shown in our application is when we try to create an item without any text on the input. So if we do this, we are going to see this error. So let's just reproduce this in our tests. So it should display an error when trying to create an item without any text. And then I just write my arrow function inside of which my tests are gonna be written. So I'm just gonna use render, and I'm going to render our app component. Nothing new here. And basically I'm gonna get by text because that's the function I'm gonna use to search for my add item button and for my error component. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this line of text. So basically I'm going to query for my add item button. I'm going to search for it. Again, nothing new happening here. And I'm gonna press it. I'm gonna use fire even.press add item button. And hence we didn't have any text written inside of text input because we have just not interacted with it. What should happen is this message should pop up on the user screen. So how we can test this, we can say const, we can create a variable and call it error message. And we can just get it by its text. So please insert a valid text. And we can just expect error message /not /to be new. And if I haven't messed up, our test should be running just fine. And yes, it is. You can see here. But let's just, yeah, it just works. But again, I'm just going to screw it up on purpose just to make sure that I'm not having any kind of false positive. So let me see what I can change here. Let me screw this text up and see what happens. Yeah, so now my test is gonna fail because we haven't found any instance with the text please insert a valid random characters text. So okay, it just works. And now we just have one test left to be done, which is whenever we have this error and after it we create a valid item, the error should be wiped out of our screen. So basically we just have to copy the first part of this test that we have just done. Let me just change its description. So it should remove the error message after creating a valid item. And basically we are going to go through the same process because we have to make the error be shown in the first place to make it disappear afterwards. But we're gonna remove the assertions. And what we're gonna do after we have made the error be shown is we are going to create a valid to do item. So what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna do this, and that's it. So I have a text input. I have to just get this get by placeholder text method from render and created commented item, blah blah blah, fire event press, and I wanna use the same assertion for the second test, but I want the error message not to be null. I want it to exist. And let's see, let's run this test, and it is broken. Why is it broken? Oh yeah, because I'm using get by text, and whenever you use get by text, if the text you are looking for isn't shown in your component, it's gonna return an error. So let me just use query by text and use it and run my test suite all over again, and now it should pass just fine. Yeah, it just passes. I don't need to screw this one up on purpose because you have just seen it being screwed up by accident. And that's it. That's my tutorial. We have just tested an application together. Basically, what you have to do to use this in a real case example, it's just create a file for each document that you want to be tested. So each component, each route of your component, I don't know, do whatever fits your situation the best. I usually create one integration test for each route in my applications, but feel free to do something different if you feel if you feel like that makes better for your application. I really hope I was able to help you. I really hope I was able to help you on your testing journey. This is my first video, so I don't know if you feel like anything should have been different. Please leave a comment behind. Please leave a like and subscribe to my channel if you liked it. And that's it. As you can see on my computer, today it's December 31. So I'm gonna enjoy my New Year's Eve. And that's it. Goodbye, folks. So that's it. Goodbye, folks. I wish you a happy New Year's. You're probably seeing this after New Year's, so happy 2021. And let's be awesome this year and each day better. And let's be awesome this year and just kick some ass. And that's it. Bye.